like to start? Would you like to be asked questions, or how would you like to go?
Let me just roll what I got.
You rock and roll anytime you're ready.
I want to welcome you to my little corner of the world. It's March 31st, 2006. And a few years ago, I was with Jill and Joanne and Debbie and telling them stories about things that happened in the family. And Jill mentioned how nice it would be if I would do a family history. And since that time, I have done a family history, a very thorough family history. All the ghosts, all the good things, all the everything. I probably have 10 books and about 20 tapes all in my head. And last year, my niece Bunny and her friend Sherry came down to tape it for me. And there's so much chaos in my little corner of the world, we couldn't make it. And thankfully, they've come back again, and we're giving it a whirl. I want you to know this is my perspective. This is from what comes to me as it comes. I ask all of you to let me know the things that you would be interested in knowing about. Many of you responded, and you had some very good questions. I don't promise to answer them all, but I'll give it a try. Let me start out with grandparents. I only had one grandparent that I knew, and they called her Grandmammy, and that was my mother's mother. She was quite a woman and certainly influential in our lives. We loved her a lot. Her mother was probably the most educated woman in our part of the state, North Carolina. She was an avid reader. People came from miles around to swap books with her. She would come down in the morning, my grandmother said, and assign them all the chores for the day. Then she would go back upstairs and read, and they would take care of everything at the home. Now, the interesting part of that is that her love for books and reading and knowledge, she never taught one of her children how to read or write. And so I came from a great ancestors being very, very educated and selfish. And I guess all of us have some of that still. My grandmother married at a young age. Her husband was quite a bit older than she. And when the 11th child was born, not too long after that, he died, and one of the children died, and I believe it was influenza that killed him. My mother talked about her dad with a lot of love, that he was a kind and gentle man. She being the first child, she helped him a lot in the fields, and she was responsible for a lot of things and taking care of the children. And I remember a story that she told, and you've probably heard it, about she never heard a father say a bad word or be too upset. And they were working in the field gathering hay. And at that time, the mule pulled a trailer, and they forked the hay into the trailer. And that day, for some reason, the mule didn't want to stay stopped. Just about time they'd pitch a big thing of hay to the trailer, he'd walk off, and they'd miss it. And her father got a little bit upset at that, I think, and finally he threw his pitchforks down, went to the front of the mule, and hit him just as hard as he could hit him, and called him a leather-eared son of a bitch. And it scared my mama half to death. She had never heard him talk such. But I hear he was a good man. They owned the land, a good provider, and apparently very prolific. Grandmama was left with 11 children, the land, and I doubt a lot of money, but some. Her family was not too poor. And it wasn't too long after his death before one of her brothers did some shenanigans and stole the land from us, what it amounted to. And she was left with very little. But with that little, she raised the 11 children. She lost several. But she did quite a good job. My mama was one of the dearest mortals I've ever known. And they were all good citizens, good moral people, as we knew morals then. When I say that, I had to back up a little bit because I remember during Prohibition that some of the children, the brothers and sisters, mamas and brothers, was making moonshine liquor. And it was very profitable back in that day. And my mother was very adverse to Daddy going into it. And my grandmother didn't quite understand that. But she didn't know the problems my mother was already having with Dad and alcohol. We had a love-hate relationship with alcohol in my family. My daddy loved it and we all hated it. So I grew up. He was a binge drinker and it was on and off. But let me go back to the grandparents. I believe my grandmother had 3 brothers and 3 or 4 sisters, some of whom they were close and some they didn't speak for many years with. My mother, being the oldest of 11, she was a very hard worker. Now on my daddy's side, he was one of 4 children. He had a brother and 2 sisters. And I'm sure you've heard stories of all of them. Aunt Mabel was a very prim and proper person, very petite. She married Uncle Ed, who was as good a man we all know as ever lived. Her sister, Aunt Helen, was quite different. She was a very vivacious and humorous woman. And she had several husbands, and some of them were questionable about what happened to them. Uncle Clarence is known in many different ways, some not quite so good. But he was very humorous and his hands were too busy around the little girls. Our cousins, his children, he and Aunt Maggie. Aunt Maggie introduced Mom and Daddy. So Uncle Clarence married Aunt Maggie, who was Mama's first cousin. And she introduced them, and I've thought about it, and what I remember hearing about that was that neither Mama nor Daddy had ever dated a lot of people. They were from a time and a place where you didn't date as we know it today. You kind of met in groups and were together a little bit and decided to marry. My mother did not know about my daddy's drinking, I understand, until after they were married. But we grew up with Aunt Maggie's children and our children almost as an integral family. We were together during the summers, and some of our other cousins would come and be with us too, but always and still, Aunt Maggie's children and us feel like brothers and sisters. Let me stop and think a moment, because there's so many ways to approach this. My daddy's mother and daddy, my granddaddy on my daddy's side was alcoholic. And I had 2 very different perspectives of my grandmother. I believe her name was Grandma Laney. I never heard Daddy say a kind word about his mother. I never heard Mother say an unkind word about her. She always mentioned she was a very loving woman. She was tortured to death by his drinking. And from my daddy, I heard that she nagged all the time. And that Uncle Jesse, I believe is his name. You'll have to be reminded that my memory is not as good as it used to be. In a few days, I'll be 73, and my mind is about 140. But nevertheless, I do remember Grandpa Jesse is his name. And hearing about him from the others, it seemed that he was a very, very humorous, good-natured man, and probably if it had not been for his drinking, would have been quite a joy to know. I knew nothing of them. They died long before I was born. Uh, my aunts and uncles, some of you wanted to know about our relationship. We had a close relationship with my great aunt and uncle, the ones that were close to my grandmother. We had a close relationship to Mama's brothers and sisters and families. They lived in Greenville, and in our growing up, we grew up, I think, rather differently. That maybe our world got a little wider and a little bigger than theirs. We loved them a lot, and in the family, there were some diseases that you probably need to know about. There was a lot of diabetes, a lot of tuberculosis, alcoholism, and rheumatoid arthritis. Fortunately, my grandmother did not have any of those, but her children were very much afflicted. And my grandmother lived to be healthy, I think 93 or 4, at which time I can't remember whether she may have had 1 or 2 children still living, but most of them died. And I can't imagine the horrors of having to bury most of your children. I remember when several of them died violent deaths. My Aunt Mary was killed in an automobile. My Uncle Bonnie drowned. And her youngest brother, Uncle Donald, was killed in the Second World War. His plane exploded over Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the largest thing they ever found to identify him was a thumb. He was buried in California, and I was fortunate enough to visit his grave back in the 50s. Put flowers on and brought pictures back from my grandmother. Mama was not a religious woman. She had a wonderful spiritual, loving belief. And she and Daddy differed in their beliefs. And they discussed it from time to time, and it was always adversely lacking in agreement, let's say. We grew up. There were 12 of us in our family. 2 died before the rest of us came along, or maybe in between the one of them. But Hazel Ruth and Wilbur Shelton were the ones that died as small children. And they're buried in Grandmama's family cemetery down in Pitt County, near Red Banks Church, if any of you care to go down. And I remember their tombstones, their little hearts, and one says that budded on earth to bloom in heaven. And the other one said, a flower that we so loveth, how soon it fadeth away. And I think probably that would have been the thoughts of my grandmother, with all of her children that she so loved, how quickly they faded away. And most of them, my mother was 62 when she died, my father 59. And most of her brothers and sisters died at a fairly early age. Only 2 of them reached longevity, and that would have been Aunt Emma and Uncle Bruce. Uncle Bruce is important in our family too. He was always looked up to, and he cared a lot about Mama and her children. They all cared a lot about Mama's children. There was something, it seemed that Mama's family, her total family, felt that we were a little different. And I think the difference was that we were vivacious, we worked hard, we played hard. We had a lot of love, we liked to enjoy things, and we were fun to be with. Everybody liked to come to our house. And it was always Aunt Betty's children were special. And my grandmother thought we were extra special. One of the things that we loved so much, and I guess tied us to our great aunts and uncles a lot, were the ones who believed and shared a belief that Mama did, and that several of us believed also. And that was the Primitive Baptist doctrine, salvation by grace. We couldn't go to church because number one, we didn't have any clothes to go to church. Number two, we couldn't have all gotten in the car to go to church. And number three, I don't know if there was one close enough around for us to go. Mama went occasionally to a church. We had a neighbor who was of that faith, and would take my mother now and then to a church. So we were raised not in a religious way, but certainly with high principles and values, and a strong belief in the God of our understanding. And that belief has carried us to this day, and I believe will carry us through. We never had any fallings out with our siblings, our cousins, our aunts and uncles that I remember. It was always a festive occasion when we got together. And the thing that I think tied us together and kept us together a lot is that in addition to playing and just loving life, we loved to sing probably as good as the Carter family. It was on television. We would sing in the summertime, in the wintertime. We would sit out on the porch in the summertime and shell beans and prepare for food for the next day, and sing our little hearts out, and the neighbors would tell us the next day how they sat out in the yard to listen to us and enjoyed it. My grandmother asked us when she died to sing at her funeral, which we did. But singing was so important in our lives. Working was extremely important in our lives. We were raised poor as Job's turkey. We had lots of good food because we raised it.